I kept this to myself for 50 years. Charles Duke, Apollo 16's lunar module pilot and one of the youngest men to walk on the moon, finally spoke about a moment that had haunted him since 1972. Something on the lunar surface didn't belong. It didn't fit the mission plan, the maps, or the rulebook of human spaceflight. What did he see? Why did he stay silent? And could the decades-old footage hold the answer? For anyone who has wondered whether the moon guards secrets, this is the confession that's been waiting in the shadows. Apollo 16 wasn't just another moon landing. By 1972, humanity had already planted flags, collected rocks, and proved that walking on the moon was possible. But this mission carried a heavier weight. NASA wanted to reach deeper into the lunar story, to venture into the highlands, rugged terrain untouched by human boots. The goal wasn't to show off technology anymore, it was to answer questions as old as time itself. Where did the moon come from? What role did it play in Earth's history? Previous Apollo missions had touched down in the Maria. Smoother plains, easier to navigate, safer, and well documented from orbit. The highlands were different. They were ancient, jagged, and rumored to hold the oldest rocks on the moon, clues to its very formation. Geologists were divided. Volcanic remnants or impact wreckage. Apollo 16 was humanity's only chance to settle the debate, but the landing would be dangerous. Dusty slopes, hidden craters, and massive boulders made every meter a gamble. Fuel margins were thin, and any misstep could end the mission before it truly began. Charles Duke felt the pressure like no one else. At 36, he was the youngest astronaut to walk on the moon, carrying the weight of past setbacks. Assigned to the Apollo 13 backup crew, he had contracted rubella from one of his children, spreading it to Ken Mattingly and forcing Mattingly's removal from the mission. Guilt and second chances intertwined, giving Duke a renewed drive to prove himself. Beside him, John Young, the calm veteran commander, carried decades of experience and nerves of steel. Orbiting the moon alone, Ken Mattingly awaited his role, a quiet redemption for the mishap of Apollo 13. Together, they formed a crew forged by pressure, mistakes, and resilience. The perfect balance to confront the unknown. Training for Apollo 16 was relentless. Every disaster imaginable was simulated: engine failures, rover malfunctions, medical emergencies. Duke rehearsed, dragging Young to safety if something went wrong during a moonwalk, navigating terrain with a disabled rover, and collecting samples with every ounce of precision. The lunar suits, marvels of engineering, were clumsy and heavy, forcing them to master movement in conditions humans were never meant to endure. Geology became as crucial as piloting. Duke learned to read rocks, identify volcanic traces, and describe formations in radio chatter, practicing in volcanic fields in Hawaii, craters in Arizona, and impact sites in Canada. Yet, despite this preparation, no simulation could account for what he would see on the lunar site. No manual could anticipate, no drill could prepare for. On April 20th, 1972, Apollo 16's lunar module, Orion, descended into the Descartes Highlands. The surface was jagged, littered with craters and ridges. Every second mattered. Young guided the module with unwavering calm. Duke called out altitude and fuel, and below them, shadows hid dangers that could end the mission. One miscalculation might have meant disaster, and yet, they landed. Duke stepped onto the lunar surface and felt the awe of being somewhere utterly alien, a place that had kept its secrets for billions of years. Time was precious oxygen, battery power, and fatigue limited every move, but they moved with precision, deploying instruments, setting up experiments, and preparing for the rover's first drive. Driving the rover changed everything. Duke's eyes expanded with each mile across the highlands, every boulder, crater, and ridge a new discovery. The terrain felt alive, the jagged hills shifting with the sun, shadows stretching unnaturally long. The stillness pressed in, and then it happened. Out of the corner of his visor, Duke saw something that shouldn't have been there. A dark shape flashed across the ridgeline, too quick, too deliberate, gone before he could fully process it. 1 second, one blink, and the moment was gone. Training demanded he focus on rocks and data. Young didn't see it. Mission Control didn't hear it. Duke buried the memory, telling himself it didn't matter, that it was fatigue, a reflection, a trick of the light. Yet the memory refused to fade, returning in quiet moments. Nagging at him with the weight of the unexplained, decades later, curiosity overrode caution. Duke revisited the Apollo 16 footage, sifting through grainy reels of history. Hours passed, the lunar surface stretched across the screen in familiar gray and dust. Then, there it was, dark, solid shape moving with intention, streaking faster than rocks or dust, casting its own shadow. It dwarfed the rover, nearly matching its size. His memory had not betrayed him. What he had seen as a young astronaut was captured, unnoticed or overlooked in NASA's archives. A fleeting proof of something outside the expected. Engineers suggested camera artifacts or rolling debris, but nothing explained the size, speed, and deliberate path of the figure. The confirmation didn't bring closure, it multiplied questions. Why had Mission Control never mentioned it? Had it been dismissed as inconclusive? Duke's conviction grew heavier with each replayed frame, his decades-long silence finally replaced by an urgent need to speak. By the time he shared his story, he was no longer concerned with skeptics or conspiracy theorists. The footage existed, his eyes had seen it. And the secret of the moon's highlands was no longer his alone to bear. He didn't claim proof of life, nor did he sensationalize the anomaly. He described it simply: a shadow, a shape, a moment that defied explanation. And yet, the revelation added depth to the Apollo legacy, reminding humanity that exploration isn't just about collecting rocks or data, it's about confronting mysteries, about acknowledging that the universe sometimes refuses to fit into neat reports. His story sparked curiosity, debate, and reflection. It challenged us to think beyond checklists and instruments, to recognize the human element in discovery. Astronauts may be trained, precise, and disciplined, but they are also witnesses to the unknown. And sometimes their testimony stretches beyond the realm of science. Half a century later, Charles Duke's confession reminds us that even in the most meticulously planned missions, the universe can still surprise us. It asks us to wonder, what else might be waiting in the shadows of the Descartes highlands, quietly unseen, silently racing past our understanding, waiting for the next human to blink and see. If you want to explore more mysteries where evidence meets human experience, watch the next video and join the hunt for the secrets that even history hasn't fully revealed. When Apollo 16 was put on the schedule, NASA's planners knew the mission had to be different. The United States had already planted flags, collected samples, and proven humans could walk, work, and return safely from the moon. But Apollo 16 carried an extra weight. It was meant to reach deeper into the lunar story than any mission before it. Scientists argued that if they could get samples from the lunar highlands, they might finally crack the mystery of how the moon itself was formed. This wasn't about proving technology anymore. It was about chasing answers to questions as old as humanity. Where did the moon come from, and what role did it play in Earth's history? Up until that point, astronauts had landed in smoother, darker plains known as Maria. Those regions were easier to access and safer for landings, but they didn't represent the oldest rocks on the moon. The highlands, by contrast, were rugged and ancient. From telescopic studies and crater counts, geologists believed they were the oldest exposed surfaces, holding clues to the very beginning of the lunar crust. If the Maria were the moon's middle-aged skin, the highlands were its bones. The Descartes highlands, the target for Apollo 16, had never been visited before. Scientists were divided over what exactly they would find. Some believed the terrain was volcanic. Others thought it was the wreckage of huge impacts that scarred the moon billions of years ago. Apollo 16 was the only chance to put those debates to rest. But betting on the highlands came with a price. The landing site was dangerous, filled with uneven ground, hidden slopes, and massive boulders. A safe descent was far from guaranteed. The lunar module had limited fuel for landing corrections, and any miscalculation could end the mission before it began. Engineers worried that the lander might sink into powdery dust or tip over on a hidden incline. Every detail had to be checked again and again. Even so, No simulation could capture the risks of a real descent into unfamiliar terrain. It was a gamble NASA chose to take, knowing that future missions might be cancelled. They had one shot to prove the risk was worth it. Charles Duke, the youngest astronaut to walk on the moon, felt that pressure firsthand. He knew that any mistake, whether in navigation, sample collection, or equipment use, could waste precious minutes. And those minutes mattered. Each moonwalk was a race against oxygen, battery power, and fatigue. Duke and mission commander John Young weren't just exploring, they were proving that humanity's push for knowledge could still justify the danger and expense of leaving Earth. The site choice wasn't just scientific daring, it set the scene for one moment no checklist could predict. A tightrope crew. The story of Apollo 16 was not just about landing on a dangerous site, it was also about the three men who shouldered that risk. John Young, Charles Duke, and Ken Mattingly were very different personalities, but together they formed one of the most carefully balanced teams in the Apollo program. Every astronaut brought a history of close calls, second chances, and lessons that made them uniquely suited for this mission. In many ways, Apollo 16 was a tightrope walk across space, and the crew itself was the balancing pole. At the top stood John Young, the mission commander. By 1972, Young was a legend within NASA. He had flown on Gemini 3, smuggled a corned beef sandwich into orbit as a joke, docked with another spacecraft on Gemini 10, and orbited the moon during Apollo 10. No one doubted his skill or composure. Young was quiet, almost reserved, but his calm approach to risk made him invaluable. If anyone could guide a lunar module down into the jagged Descartes highlands, it was John Young. He was the steady hand on the controls, the man NASA trusted when there was no margin for error. Charles Duke, the lunar module pilot, could not have been more different. At 36, he was the youngest man to walk on the moon. His journey to Apollo 16 was marked by setbacks that would have crushed others. Assigned to the Apollo 13 backup crew, Duke had unknowingly contracted rubella from one of his children. His illness spread to Ken Mattingly, forcing NASA to pull Mattingly off Apollo 13 just days before launch. Duke carried the guilt of that episode, but it also gave him a second chance. By the time Apollo 16 came around, he was determined to prove himself not only as an astronaut, but as a professional who could deliver under the crushing expectations of NASA's most ambitious scientific mission yet. Then there was Ken Mattingly, the command module pilot. If anyone understood the sting of bad timing, it was him. He had trained for Apollo 13, only to be yanked at the last moment because of Duke's exposure. Jack Swigert took his place, and history remembers Swigert for helping bring Apollo 13 home after the explosion. For years, Mattingly lived with the knowledge that he had missed both disaster and glory. Apollo 16 was his redemption. His role was lonely. He would spend most of the mission orbiting the moon alone in the command module. But it was also vital. Without him, Young and Duke could never return safely. What made this crew remarkable was not just their experience, but their resilience. All three men had tasted failure or frustration in ways that could have ended their careers. Instead, each returned sharper and more determined. That sense of redemption bonded them together. Their training was grueling. Long days of geology trips, endless hours in simulators, and survival exercises that pushed them past exhaustion. Young demanded discipline. Duke added youthful energy. Mattingly supplied technical precision. Together, they struck a balance that worked. NASA needed that balance. The Apollo program was winding down, and public interest had cooled. The astronauts felt the weight of carrying a mission that might be one of the last. Every hour of data, every rock sample, every moment on the moon mattered. It wasn't just about personal pride, it was about proving Apollo still had scientific firepower. That exploration was worth the cost, and that the risks they were taking would pay off in knowledge. Skill and pressure sharpened the crew, but pressure also creates blind spots, and one of those would matter. Training for the unknown, for all the glory of stepping onto the moon. The road to Apollo 16 was built on sweat, repetition, and preparation for dangers that no human had faced before. Training was not glamorous, it was exhausting, relentless, and sometimes demoralizing. Yet without it, there was no way John Young, Charles Duke, and Ken Mattingly could survive, let alone make Apollo 16 one of the most ambitious missions in NASA's history. They were being asked to operate machines on alien ground, collect scientific samples under brutal conditions, and do it all while the clock of life support ticked away. Training had to make them ready for the unknown. Much of that preparation focused on disaster scenarios. NASA simulated everything that could go wrong. Engine misfires, rover breakdowns, communication blackouts, even medical emergencies like a ruptured suit or a sudden illness. The astronauts drilled responses until their reactions became instinct. In one exercise, Duke had to practice what he would do if Young collapsed during an EVA. Could he drag his commander back to the lunar module in reduced gravity while keeping himself upright in a stiff suit? In another, they rehearsed procedures for a rover that wouldn't start, forcing them to plan how much ground they could cover on foot before oxygen ran out. These what-if drills were grim, but they could mean the difference between life and death on the lunar surface. The lunar roving vehicle was at the center of much of this training. Unlike earlier Apollo crews, Young and Duke would not be confined to walking distance from the lunar module. The rover gave them the power to travel miles across the highlands. That freedom also brought new risks. Could they navigate back if the vehicle failed? Could they handle the sharp slopes and deep craters of the Descartes region? Engineers built mock lunar landscapes on Earth-dusty, rocky fields filled with obstacles to test the rover's handling. Duke and Young spent hours bouncing over simulated ridges, learning how to control the machine in a world where gravity pulled at only 1/6 of Earth's strength. The rover would extend their reach, but it could also strand them far from home if anything went wrong. Training didn't stop with vehicles. The suits themselves were another battlefield. They were marvels of engineering portable life support systems that kept astronauts alive against deadly temperatures, radiation, and vacuum. But they were also heavy, stiff, and awkward. Imagine trying to pick up a pebble while wearing a suit of armor, gloves that robbed you of dexterity, and a helmet that narrowed your vision. Duke and Young practiced endlessly in these suits, lifting tools, swinging hammers, and bagging rocks until the moves became muscle memory. They learned how to conserve energy, how to squat without toppling over, and how to adjust their balance in a world where a single stumble could send them crashing into sharp rocks. Geology became the unexpected heart of their preparation. NASA knew Apollo 16 had to bring home more than heroic photographs. It had to deliver science. Geologists drilled the astronauts in the art of seeing rocks, spotting which samples revealed ancient volcanic flows, which showed signs of impacts, which might hold clues to the moon's beginnings. Field trips took them to craters in Arizona, lava flows in Hawaii, and even impact scars in Canada. There, Duke practiced describing formations in short bursts of radio chatter, used as he would have to do on